Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS legal hotline lawyer. And today is the first day in a video series discussing Form 22EF, a sometimes misunderstood form, one of the most important forms, honestly, in our statewide form system. And you don't have to hear me say that alone, because I'm joined today by...
My name is Travis Davis. I'm with Coldwell Banker Tomlinson. I'm the branch manager in the Kennewick office, and I have the great pleasure of joining Annie today to hopefully decipher this form a little bit so we can all understand it a little bit better.
And Travis graciously agreed to come help us with this because he and I have had discussions about this form, and admittedly, it is a confusing form. Confusing only, though, if you haven't taken the time to understand it. Wouldn't you agree, Travis, that when you really kind of dive into it and look at the language in it, it becomes a lot more understandable?
I think that's true of any form. If you slow down and take the time to read it word for word, then I think you'll come away with a lot better understanding when you're done with that.
All right. So we're going to spend, no doubt, a few videos doing just that, looking word for word at this form, because it is a form that should be heavily used by every real estate broker writing a purchase and sale agreement, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller in many cases. But let's talk about why I would say that. Okay, before we get to the language of the form, the definition section, Travis, I think that if it's okay with you, I think we should spend a few minutes talking about why Form 22EF, the evidence of funds addendum, must be used in many, many transactions. Okay?
Okay.
Goes back to Form 21, actually, our purchase and sale agreement. And the very first boilerplate provision of Form 21 is paragraph A. And paragraph A says, among other things, that the buyer is not relying on any contingent source of funds unless otherwise disclosed in the purchase and sale agreement. Buyer's not relying on any contingent source of funds unless otherwise disclosed in the purchase and sale agreement. Right?
Perfect reason to use the 22EF.
That's right. So, Travis, when it says that, what other forms might brokers use to disclose reliance on contingent source of funds?
You've got your standard 22A, your financing addendum, which is a very common one that's used to disclose that the buyer is getting the loan and all the terms of that in that addendum. You have a home sale contingency, of course. It says I have to sell my house and put my house on the market, and it implied that my funds are coming from the sale of that home to complete this transaction. And then you also have a 22Q, which is a pending sale contingency as well. It says I already have an offer, but I just need to close the sale of my property.
I agree. Those are the three biggies. In fact, they're probably the only three that would disclose a buyer's reliance on a contingent source of funds other than 22EF. And so in a minute, we're going to talk about the definition section set forth in Form 22EF, and we're necessarily going to talk again about Form 22A, the financing contingency, Form 22B, the home sale contingency, and Form 22Q, the pending sale contingency, the three forms Travis just identified, because those are carved out of the definition of contingent funds, and we're going to talk about that because it's important that you understand that. But once more, just before we get to the definition section, it's absolutely imperative that you understand the importance of, as a buyer broker, of disclosing buyer's reliance on a contingent source of funds. So, Travis, as an example, what kind of funds, in your experience, does a buyer sometimes rely on that would be a contingent source of funds that aren't included as either Form 22A financing contingency funds, 22B home sale contingency funds, or 22Q pending sale funds?
The first example that comes to mind would be a gift from a relative, a parent, gift from grandma, that kind of thing. That'd be one of the big ones we see quite a bit. Some of the rare ones we see are maybe a potential settlement. Maybe I'm going to receive a settlement from a lawsuit, and I have some money coming in from that. It will allow me to purchase this property.
Okay. And there's more, and we'll talk about more, right?
Okay.
But the importance is, buyer brokers, if your buyer is relying on a contingent source of funds, and you as the buyer's broker held to the standard of care of a lawyer when you prepare the purchase and sale agreement, fail to identify, fail to disclose the buyer's reliance on that contingent source of funds, then you've drafted a purchase and sale agreement in which your buyer, at best, misrepresents their financial condition and at worst commits fraud regarding their financial condition. Because in Form 21, Paragraph A, your buyer has represented to the seller that your buyer is not relying on a contingent source of funds. So you must disclose buyer's reliance on that contingent source of funds, or else your buyer is in conflict with Form 21, Paragraph A. Buyer is not relying on a contingent source of funds unless otherwise disclosed in this purchase and sale agreement. So one more thing, Travis, before we get to the definitions. As a buyer's broker, it's imperative when you sit down to write that purchase and sale agreement for the buyer, and the buyer tells you, I'm going to get a loan, here's my pre-approval letter, I'm getting a whatever type of loan they describe, I'm putting 90%, it's a 90% loan to value, I'm going to put down 10%. What question must buyer broker ask that buyer right then before you go any further?
Do you have those funds in a bank account right now?
Those funds being which funds?
The down payment funds that you're saying that you're relying on.
Yeah. And I would even add one more, down payment funds and your closing costs. Where are we getting your closing costs, buyer? And what if the buyer says, you know what, Travis, really like you, and I've already covered that issue with my lender, so I don't feel like you and I need to go over that information. What then?
That's a very difficult one. I mean, when the buyer is not willing to give you as their agent that information, it's critical. You have to know that. So I would turn it back around and say, look, it's super important that you and I have this relationship, that I understand exactly what you have and what you have access to. We need to write up this offer so that we're not committing fraud based on the paragraph 21, Form 21, paragraph A.
So you would actually go through and show them the language of Form 21, paragraph A, and point out to them why it's so important to make that disclosure?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's my sole job in that transaction at that point, is to go over the forms with them and let them know how they affect them.
Perfect. I agree 100%. Okay, I had promised that we were going to go through why it's important to use the form and the definitions in this first video, but we spent a long time talking about why it's important to use this video. I think it might be a good idea to actually stop right here, let our listeners take a break, and then pick up the definition section in the boilerplate language of Form 22EF in video number 2. You agree?
I agree.
All right, let's do that. If you have questions on anything we've spoken about so far, and there's more to come, but if you have any questions about what we've talked about so far, please send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.